Imagine you are sitting in the dark staring into a fire that has been burning for 6 hours. You have food in your stomach, your group is safe within the perimeter of the light, and yet you feel a heavy, suffocating grey veil settled over your mind. In the modern world, we call this depression, a condition we often treat as a private, internal breakdown of chemistry. But if you were a human living 50,000 years ago, your low mood wasn't a private medical diagnosis. It was a high-stakes biological signal that the entire group was programmed to respond to. We often assume our ancestors were too busy fighting off leopards or chasing mammoths to have the luxury of mental illness. That assumption is wrong, very wrong. The question isn't whether ancient humans felt the weight of despair, but how they managed to survive it when a single unresponsive individual could mean a catastrophic failure for the whole group. Today, we live in a world with 47 apps designed to make us happy, yet we are lonelier than ever. Our ancestors had none of that technology, but they had something we've quietly abandoned. A social architecture so dense that it was virtually impossible to fall through the cracks alone. The distributed soul. Let's start with the obvious difference. In the Pleistocene, you were never alone, not even theoretically. From the moment you were born, you were embedded in a web of relationships where your survival was a collective engineering project. When a modern person falls into depression, they often retreat into a separate room, behind a closed door, in a house where they might live in total isolation. To an ancient human, this scenario would be more than just sad. It would be a death sentence. Because human infants are born premature by design, requiring years of constant physical contact to survive, our brains evolved to expect a distributed network of care that never truly ends. This is what scientists call the cooperative breeding model. In this system, childcare and emotional support were not favors or cultural niceties. They were fundamental parts of how the group functioned. If you were struggling, you didn't have to ask for help because your grandmother, your aunts, and unrelated adults were already within arm's reach nearly 50% of the time. Anthropologists have noted that in traditional hunter-gatherer societies, the concept of a sole point of failure for emotional health simply didn't exist. The group shared the load of exhaustion. This wasn't a philosophy, it was survival engineering. If your spirit flagged, the social architecture around you was so dense that it physically prevented you from withdrawing into the kind of total darkness that modern depression thrives on. Ritual as psychological infrastructure. But what happened when the community noticed someone was slipping away? They didn't just tell them to go for a walk. They used ritual, the original social technology. Every human culture on record has developed ceremonies to process grief, transition, and internal crisis. In ancient societies, when a person felt lost, it was often interpreted as a spiritual displacement that required a group-level intervention. The archaeological record shows that ritual wasn't just superstition. It served a real social function by publicly assigning responsibility for an individual's welfare back to the tribe. They used the inhalation of medicinal smoke like cannabis or henbane, not just for pleasure, but to open a channel for healing within a communal circle. This shared altered experience created a sense of connection and mutual trust that is very hard to replicate in a therapist's office. When a group sat together in a closed space, breathing in ritual smoke and entering an altered state, they were synchronizing their neural activity. They were rebuilding the deep trust and group identity that depression often erodes. The smoke circle wasn't just a party, it was psychological infrastructure. It provided a framework for processing the unsettling reality of existence without leaving the individual to do it alone. The endurance. Cure. There is also the matter of the biological engine inside you. Your ancestors didn't survive by being the strongest. They survived because they were the only mammal built to cool itself while moving for 40 kilometers a day. This persistence hunting wasn't just about food, it was a constant rhythmic calibration of the nervous system. In the modern world, we spend our days in cognitive overload, filling every silence with a smartphone screen. We have replaced 2 million years of continuous ground contact with bouncers, playpens, and office chairs. But your body doesn't know it's 2026. It still carries the sweat glands and upright posture of a creature designed for the long-distance chase. When ancient humans felt the onset of what we might call a low mood, the demands of the group meant they were still forced to move, still forced to track, and still forced to endure. This physical movement regulates stress hormones and heart rate in ways that modern science is only beginning to rediscover. Our ancestors lived in a biological rhythm where the chemicals associated with achievement and survival were triggered by physical persistence. They didn't have exercise routines. They had a life that demanded the very thing that modern medicine now prescribes to fight depression: movement and light. The sentinel function. Even in sleep, the ancient human was protected by the sentinel function. In every observed hunter-gatherer society, nobody ever sleeps alone. You slept in physical contact with at least one other person, usually several. This practice, called co-sleeping, was the default human behavior for 99% of our species' existence. The presence of others' breathing and movement provided a constant, subtle stimulation to the brain, reminding the subconscious that the perimeter was safe. Modern depression is often accompanied by sleep disorders, partly because we have replaced this communal sleep environment with a separate nursery and an anxiety around dependence that is evolutionarily bizarre. Our ancestors' sleep was tuned to stay light enough to respond to the group, creating a biological sense of safety that a locked bedroom door simply cannot provide. The price of the smartphone. Perhaps the most profound difference lies in how they handled the quiet moments. Today, we fear boredom so much that we have 10,000 things to watch at any given moment. But boredom, 100,000 years ago, was the catalyst for imagination and creativity. It forced the brain to generate its own stimulation, leading to the invention of art, music, and storytelling. When an ancient human felt a wandering mind, it didn't just lead to existential dread, it led to gossip, the social grooming that built the very society that protected them. They talked about who did what and who said what, building a web of trust that allowed them to organize hunts of 100 people. This social gossip wasn't a waste of time. It was the cognitive revolution that made humans the most dangerous and most connected predator on the planet. In the modern world, we have eliminated boredom but increased cognitive overload, never giving our brains the chance to process or consolidate. We have dismantled the structures that were doing the important work of emotional regulation without fully understanding what we were destroying. Conclusion. So, what did ancient humans do when they fell into depression? They didn't fix it individually. They absorbed it collectively. They carried the person through the day. They held them through the night, and they drew them into rituals that reminded them they were part of a lineage 300,000 years long. They chewed their food for them. They sang to them with vulture bone flutes, and they reminded them that they were never the sole point of failure. We live in the greatest era of child survival and physical health in human history, and nobody is arguing we should go back to a 40% infant mortality rate. But within the domain of emotional survival, we are running a large and poorly controlled experiment on our own species. We have antibiotics and car seats, but we have lost each other. Next time you feel that pulse of ancient anxiety or that weight you can't quite name, remember that it's not a moral failure. It is your 2-million-year-old brain flagging that the distributed network is missing. Your ancestors didn't survive by being the strongest. They survived because they didn't do it alone. And maybe that's the most important piece of survival engineering we have left to reclaim.